On the line with us today is a new guest, Maren Katuso. Maren is the Chief Energy Investment Strategist at Casey Research and an expert on many things, including energy, resources, international real estate, and the topic of today's interview, Russia. Maren, thanks for taking the time to join us today. We're delighted to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
I've been working to get you on the show for quite some time because you're an expert on a topic I hold a lot of interest in, and that's Vladimir Putin and Russia. And while the majority of Americans are obsessing over Putin's social injustices and the Winter Olympic Games, Putin is quietly taking over the world. Over the past few months, Russia has reemerged as a powerhouse with both the Syrian situation and now Ukraine. Can you talk to our listeners about how Putin has utilized resources to Russia's advantage?
Sure. It's something that we've been talking about for years in our Casey Energy report. I think it goes back to really the history of Vladimir Putin. A lot of people don't understand that his grandfather was actually the personal aide and cook for not just Lenin, but also Stalin. He was one of the few people who was able to survive, the whole time of Stalin and outlived Stalin. So as a child, Vladimir Putin got all the stories from his grandfather. And when he got his law degree, he became the head of basically what became the KGB in Eastern Germany. And when the USSR fell apart, he went back to St. Petersburg. So that's where he was born, which became Leningrad later on. Then they renamed it St. Petersburg. So at that point, when he wrote his PhD thesis, it was based on the importance of consolidating the natural resource sector within Russia to be able to build and develop a platform for the other economies and technologies to grow within Russia. So by 1999, Putin moves to Moscow and got the attention of Yeltsin. Now, at that time, Yeltsin was really, really low in the ratings, and he basically sold his soul to the oligarchs who basically stole all the assets of Russia. So at that point, Putin became prime minister. He was the sixth prime minister in 8 years, and no one knew anything about this guy. And his first big move was to go in and take on the Chechnya war, and he did it with a force. So where Putin was very successful, he understood that all nations, all humans feel a pride, a national pride, when their country goes in and wins a quick war. It doesn't matter what country you are. If it's a long nagging war, and the Vietnam's a good example for the Americans, the people get tired of it. So his next move was to basically go up against the oligarchs. And that's where he was able to go and consolidate the assets. And we all know about Khodorkovsky, the Yukos scandal, and how he built Rosneft into the world's largest producer of oil. So that's kind of how he went. And what he first did was had to take complete control within Russia before he's able to expand the influence outside of Russia. And now, let's fast forward 15 years of him being in power. Russia is the largest producer of natural gas in the world. They're the largest producer of oil in the world. They're the largest producer of uranium resources in the world. They have the highest upgrading facilities for uranium in the world. They have about half of all the uranium resources in the world within their sphere of influence. The Putinization of natural resources has occurred.
I joke with my friend Josh all the time that Putin is a perfect example of a rare case when a dictatorship can actually work and work very well. And I want to explore a specific example of what Russia is doing in the uranium space at the moment. I read a book a while back called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and in that book the author outlines how the United States, starting back in the 60s, would loan billions of dollars to emerging nations to construct power plants, road systems, and a host of other infrastructure projects. And this money would then be paid back to employ U.S. contracting firms, to build these projects and integrate the United States into these growing economies. And Russia is now doing a similar thing with nuclear power by vertically integrating itself into the entire supply chain up into power production. Can you explain this to our listeners a bit?
Sure. So what the Russians are doing quite intelligently is not just providing the uranium fuel. Putin learned from the devastation of the USSR, where in 1992, the Americans signed the HEU agreement, the highly enriched uranium agreement, where basically the Russians would downblend their nuclear warheads and send the downblended fuel to the US so they could burn the fuel to create electricity in the US. As a result of that, what people don't realize is 10% of America's baseload electricity comes from Russian nuclear fuel. On top of that, in America today, the Russians produce more uranium on American soil than all the American companies combined. So let's fast forward to where we are today now. Rather than just providing the fuel, Putin's doing exactly that. In countries such as Saudi Arabia, even in Belarus, if you go to Sri Lanka, places in Pakistan, Iran, what he's trying to do is say, okay, not only will I provide you a life supply, a stable, secure supply of the uranium fuel, we'll lend you the money to build the nuclear facility. You're going to use our firms and our technology and our equipment and also our fuel. So he's very vertically integrating it. In America today, because of the rules, GE cannot do the same thing. So GE used to be trying to do in the 50s and 60s what Russia is doing today, but it can no longer do that.
Sticking with nuclear power for a minute, uranium is in a supply shortfall and interest is coming back into the sector. Can you outline the fundamentals that will lead to a major rebound in uranium stocks in the coming months and years?
Well, the first one, the obvious one is, what is Japan going to do with their nuclear reactors? They have 48 nuclear reactors down right now. And that has been the big question. So that is the first catalyst. And, you know, I spoke to quite a few of the actual major guys in Japan to see what is going to happen and what time frame are they going to bring these nuclear reactors on. Everyone agrees that Japan cannot afford the electricity costs of importing such high amounts of LNG. They're paying, you know, close to 6-7 times what we're paying in North America for natural gas. The question is, it's more of a political and social issue now. How do you get the people to feel comfortable? And the best strategy that I heard from a very high source in Japan was that we're going to bring 2 reactors on first, and they'll operate them for 3 months just to prove to everyone that they're safe. Then the next 3 months, the next quarter, they'll bring back 4 on. So it's going to be a gradual step up to bringing on those nuclear reactors. Then the next big question is in the US, Obama has changed the rules to the DOE, where the Department of Energy historically never sold more than 10% in the auctions domestically to what America consumes. So America consumes anywhere between 45 to 50 million pounds a year for their nuclear reactors. And this was the first year where Obama sold north of 15% of that amount into the spot market. The third thing that fell this in 2013 was San Onofre's nuclear reactor in California sold 10 million pounds into the spot market also. So historically, the spot market never made up more than 10% of all the uranium transactions. Well, 2013 was a very different, it was an anomaly where over 75% of all the uranium transactions occurred in the spot market. And that was because of the shutdown of the Japanese reactors, so they had to get rid of a bunch of fuel that the Russians bought. Number 2, Obama needed to raise $250 million through the DOE to make previous legacy cleanups, so he had to sell about 7.5 million pounds in the spot market. And then the San Onofre nuclear power plant sold about 10 million pounds. So all of these forces that normally don't happen hit the spot market. And on top of that, the Russians are in an underfeeding environment. Because the Americans are basically cannibalizing themselves in the nuclear sector, the Russians benefit because of the low cost of single work units. We call them SWUs in the sector. And because SWUs are so cheap, the Russians can reprocess lower and lower grade tails at a profit. So this is the opposite situation in the 70s, where SWUs were so expensive that it was an overfeeding market. Now we're in an underfeeding market. So all of these is a kind of a perfect storm for a bad market. But all of these things are going to clear itself out because the cure for low prices is low prices. And at $35 uranium, Kazakhstan, which is very close ally to the Russians, have basically said, we can't bring on any new production and we can't sustain our decline rates because it's an ISR. Cameco basically said at $35, we don't make any money. We've seen what happened to Paladin. We've seen what's happened to Rio. So BHP, same situation. They can't make money at $35. So the reality is this price where we're at right now, the existing producers can't make money. So the question is when will the secondary supply start decreasing? And we're reaching that point. So I really see the bull market for uranium taking off late 2013, but most likely 2014, but most likely early 2015 is when I see the spot market to start picking up.
That sounds like a great time for investors to start getting in at this point. Moving back to Putin and armed with the knowledge you have about Russia, what do you think Putin's plans are moving forward? He'll continue to accumulate resources for Russia, all the while lining his pockets. In fact, some reports claim that Putin is actually the richest man alive. Do you foresee some sinister plan for world domination, or is Putin just looking to get rich and make Russia a powerhouse?
Look, like I've been studying this for years and years, and I look at a company like Quadrilla, which we were heavily involved with, that now is making all the headlines in Bloomberg and in the UK London Times. And it was all based on the Putinization of resources. The reality is Putin does not have no evil domination plan. He is doing what's best interest for Russia. And the best interest for Russia is to consolidate its resources. And look what they just did with Ukraine. On April 1st, and this is not an April Fool's Day joke, they actually said, okay, we've been subsidizing the Ukrainian natural gas sector. We're going to make you pay a little bit more. And they're still getting a big discount, but overnight, they increased it by 44%. Higher electricity and oil and natural gas costs are going to happen in Europe. Russia is already lining itself up closer with China. They've already announced a deal with Iran, not using petrodollars. So the key for Putin is to expand his markets to the east, and it happens slowly. New pipelines have to be developed. You need longer-term contracts. You're going to see an announcement before summer of 2014 where the Russians are going to announce a major offtake deal with the Chinese. That is going to really startle the Europeans, who have basically become more addicted to Russian sources of energy. For example, let's take Germany. Did you know that Germany imports more oil, more natural gas today than they did 20 years ago from the Russians? Why? Because they got addicted to the cheap Russian energy sources. That's changing now.
Wrapping up here, how do you see Russia playing out in the long term? Jim Rogers has said that China will lead the 21st century and that Russia will be a short-term boom based on a resource bull market. Do you agree with this thinking, or is Russia really setting itself up for the long term?
Well, I believe they are setting themselves up for the long term because they're doing all the right things right now. They're buying more gold from their, whereas we all see most of these countries, look at Canada, look at the US, the Russian state is buying more gold. They're signing long-term contracts with the new markets. India is looking towards Russia. China has already announced deals with Russia. They're going to continue announcing. I expect the biggest one to be announced before summer. And what Russia is positioning themselves to do is to be the fuel for the future engines of the economy. So whether it's China, South Korea, you look at India, all of those nations are looking towards Russia. And at the same time, just like America did in the 60s and 70s, they're going to use that wealth to innovate. And it will happen with time. And what people forget, a good case study to use, where I think Jimmy Rogers is wrong, if you look at a lot of the innovation in Israel, where a lot of the tech companies, they're actually Russian Jewish citizens. And the engineers, there was such a wave, an exodus of Russian engineers when the USSR fell, and they went to Israel. And these individuals have created, if you look at the most publicly traded technology companies, they're actually coming out of Israel that list on the US exchange. And those are run by Russian Jewish citizens who were trained in Russia. So I think the future will be similar to that, but it will be within Russia. So do not count Russia out in the future.
How do investors look to enter the Russian space? I even understand from my discussions with Doug Casey a couple weeks back that the Russian stock market is extremely cheap right now due to the Crimean crisis.
Well, you just nailed it on the head. For example, take Gazprom, which is the world's largest producer of natural gas. They're trading at a 2 times PE. That's 2, not 22, not 200 times, that's 2. You can buy them for 2 times PE. Now the question is do you want to expose yourself to what I call the Russian risk? I think for a North American investor, which I am, the biggest bang for your buck is going to be investing in companies that are exploring within the EU 28, that are bringing modern technology and modern equipment to penetrate past producing oil fields. So basically what has happened in the Bakken and the Eagleford and the Marcellus is going to happen in Europe. Quadrilla is a perfect case study of that. And fortunes are going to be made by investors who invest in the right management teams, because countries like the UK, Germany, they need to get away from their major dependence on Russian energy. They got to get the energy within their country, and they have it. You know, people forget that Germany was producing oil 50 years before America was, but they've never seen modern technology. The first horizontal well over 250 meters just happened in Germany. So basically what the unconventional revolution, the shale revolution of America, which happened about 15 years ago, is now starting in Europe. And that is where I think people could make a fortune, playing Russia.
Very interesting. Marin, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Not many people are talking about Russia as a powerhouse these days, but I think that might change in the coming years. And I'll be sure to let everyone know you were first to the table.
Thanks a lot.